Well, I'm intimidated. I should probably agree with you from now on.
Yeah, please do.
All right. So, what else are we going to talk about today?
You guys we're talking about consciousness, so we could talk about that for half a second.
Yeah, let's introduce our very honored. We're honored to have our guest here. He was what impresses me is he was a professional soccer player, a real professional soccer player in Nijmegen, Holland, where they really take their soccer seriously. So you can bet that he's had some beautiful girlfriends. And that's really that's what I'm impressed with. I couldn't care less whether he can kick a ball in a hole. But imagine the most beautiful girl you've ever seen. This guy was probably with her and bored out of his skull.
Well,
wait.
But he came back to America after his soccer career and studied philosophy.
That's right.
All right, so he's not just a piece of meat. Kevin, and he studied Western philosophy too, probably epistemological philosophy and all.
All kinds of stuff.
Yeah, but that's the hard part. Western philosophy, Anglo-American philosophy is I think the toughest. It's the most logical. It's the most parsing of the definition of words. So you really have to be smart. And then he spent 7 months in a Zen monastery. So this is the real deal. And I think he should replace Rick for this show or me. Well, let's see. You now, having said all that.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? I've always wanted to ask, real quick. Isn't it true that when you're a professional soccer player, if I was to put an apple on my head and stand like 50 yards away, you could kick a ball and hit that apple?
Maybe Lionel Messi could, but it's a challenge, right? I mean, you'd probably get a broken nose or something.
But still, if you could hit from 30 yards away, you could hit a 10-inch range.
Players are remarkably accurate kicking a large ball with their feet. And some of the things that they can do stun even me.
I mean, there was that commercial where that the English guy, this real good-looking Beckham, and he kicked a ball into a trash can
well, people do that
super far away.
So there's a whole genre of YouTube videos dedicated to these kinds of feats. You know, they'll kick them from one rooftop, off a bell tower, off a basketball hoop, into a trash can. But you didn't see the 1,050 times they did it before they got one that worked. But it's a little bit like throwing a football. Some of these quarterbacks are extremely, impressively accurate. And soccer players have that ability. I would say not every soccer player. But
did you ever stop a mugging you're walking down the street in Brooklyn and you see a crime in progress and there's a beer can on the sidewalk and you kick the can and you...
Not yet.
Okay.
I aspire to have that happen, but I'm hoping.
I mean, I'd love to ask you more about your career. I'm actually curious because is it a prejudice on mine that if you're on a Dutch soccer team, you're probably better than if you're on an American soccer team?
No, that's fair. American soccer has lagged behind.
So you really, you actually traded up by going to Europe as opposed to the basketball thing where you're not as good at basketball if you wind up playing for Italy.
That's right. It's the inverse. Yeah.
So you went up. Just out of curiosity, how did you get so good when you were so young? Because you were like 15 when this all happened.
It's a good question because I did, play. I didn't come up in a European system where they have, youth programs that are attached to professional teams, and they have the best coaches and they have feeder systems and they're recruiting the best kids in the town and they all get sucked into the pro, team.
Right.
I was coached by dads until I was 10 or 11, before I, maybe even a little later, 12 or 13, before I had a real coach. And even then, he wasn't, you know, an elite coach by any means. But I actually got connected to the Dutch stuff because I went to a soccer camp run by, you know, a former Dutch professional player, Klaas de Boer. And I got, you know, I made the squad that they chose to take on a tour through Europe, playing, you know, in different clubs and tournaments and stuff. And I did one with them, and then later on I did one with a separate group, and then I made some connections and whatever. But
And you did well enough that a professional team wanted you.
right,
They saw you. They scouted you. They observed that you did well, and they
I had to
wanted
go
you.
try out, yeah,
Uh-huh.
and do that. And I played for the youth under 18 team, and I got to train with the second team, which is like the younger guys and the reserve squad to the first team, and that's in the Eredivisie, which is the first division of the Dutch Premier League. It's redundant, but
But how did it? I mean, how did it end? Why did you
well,
come back to America?
There was a girl
Why
I
aren't
liked,
you
and
in-
I was homesick, and I had the opportunity to stay, and I gave it up because I was homesick.
Wow.
And,
Wouldn't you be
yeah.
like a millionaire now, driving
Well, there's
around
no
in a
guarantee I would have.
Porsche or something?
There's no guarantee I would have succeeded. I was not the best player by any means. I think I had good talent. I think if I had grown up in that system, maybe I would have ultimately had made it to the highest levels. But I don't know.
You played in college,
I played in college.
but you didn't want to go on and play in the American pros?
No, I think I got sidetracked. I got
By philosophy.
Yeah, by philosophy and other things, and I had spent so much damn time on soccer, you know, by that point that I was kind of sick of it.
Wow.
You know? I was burnt out, and
Okay.
yeah, I missed out on a lot of the shenanigans that, you know, young folks tend to have.
Okay.
So
you were going to say something about consciousness.
well, you know, this subject came up the other night when Rick was talking to another fellow that he does these interviews with, and he was talking about his informational cosmology and consciousness, and you know, we were talking to you about this painting and your spiritual proclivities and ideas, and Rick is a relatively non-spiritual person, but he's got some ideas about the universe having a propensity for producing intelligence, and there being some, maybe perhaps spiritual in a loose way, significance to that fact.
It's not the worst news spiritually, it's not the
Right.
best either.
Right. Well, we have this shared background of, you know, partaking in meditation, and specifically Zen Buddhist forms of meditation, and came up the other night, you know, we were talking about the relationship of consciousness to the self, and how consciousness monitors various aspects of the self. And my experience with the meditation has given me some sense that the Buddhist approach to thinking of consciousness as a standing in some kind of a transcendental position to the contents of consciousness is a valid, from both an experiential point of view and a theoretical point of view, and it solves a lot of the problems that I have thought about.
Okay, you lost
I'll go back.
some people. Now, when you say the Buddhist concept of standing in relation to,
Sure.
say it in layman's terms.
Okay, so I guess the idea is that there's this idea in Buddhism that in order to eliminate suffering, one has to know one's true self.
Individual suffering.
Yes.
Like suffering of the person who's practicing the...
That's right. So, one of the essential features of life is that, is the truth of dukkha, is that life is suffering. And, part of Buddha's Eightfold Path and all that stuff is figuring out how to eliminate suffering. And part of that process, the most essential part, is realizing the nature of the mind. And, the hope is that you, either in meditation or in some other form of realization, you can penetrate into that consciousness. This is a very bad description, but and what one sees when one experiences one's true self is that it doesn't have any inherent properties. It is without properties, and it is frequently described as a kind of observing or witnessing awareness that can't be given any property because it's always already that which sees anything that arises within it. So that experientially, even though I'm describing it poorly, seems to be right. And if we are trying to understand how consciousness emerges in a material
Let me
universe.
interrupt you just for
Okay.
1 minute, okay? Because I want to put it in a way that is a little easier for the layman to understand. What Kevin is saying is that there is the thought and there is the observer of the thought. So that means that some of you watching this will have noticed that you are having a thought. I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. And then part of you says, well, just shut up, because if we can calm down, we can make it to the Burger King in 20 minutes. And so you don't have to panic right now. And what you've just done, if I think you may agree with me, Kevin, is you've separated your observing consciousness from your thoughts. So you thought that your thoughts were I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. You thought that was your whole world. But it turns out that there's another part of you that's observing this and can actually take over and say, hey, Sonny, we can get through this. I'm observing that you're panicking, but we can make it to the Burger King. And that part of you that's observing, that is the consciousness, because it's not hungry, it's mature, it's sophisticated, it's aloof, it's detached.
Can I agree?
Wait,
disagree?
hang for 1 second. I just
Okay.
want to make sure that we're on the same page. Kevin, am I on the right track
You're
here
on the
with
right
what you're
track.
trying to say?
I would say that it's not, okay, so if you're speaking loosely by saying it's aloof, that, that's true. But it's it's free of any properties whatsoever. So it doesn't have any dialogue attached to it. It's the observer of any dialogue that arises in the mind. But yes, when there is that mirroring relationship, or that relationship where the mind sees or is aware of the impulse to eat a hamburger or whatever it might be, there's some part of you that is bigger than the impulse itself, that's aware of the impulse. And that which is aware of those thoughts, emotions, impulses, desires, pains, sensations, perceptions, is what we're talking about here.
So is it this, like saying that when you're in pain, your fingers are caught in a car door, this Zen observer can say, well, this hurts like hell, but this is just what certain parts of my body and mind want to feel as it's happening, and I don't have to entirely buy into that.
Well, there are cases of Buddhist monks, for instance, that can burn themselves alive without moving, because they can,
because they
go into
understand
some-
what it is.
They're still feeling that probably immense pain. I'm not sure.
But they can deal with it because they understand that this is just that they don't have to react to it in a particular way, with that particular way being screaming and trying to put out the flames.
Something to that effect, yeah.
All right. I would semi-agree with that and also disagree.
Okay.
Because I would argue that consciousness as experienced is the experience of things being really real. And generally, for us, the consciousness pertains to us, though it wouldn't have to in every conscious system, but since we're evolved creatures, and evolution wants us not to die until we've reproduced at least, they make a nice show with us at the center of it. But it's not the self it's the really realness of experience, fleshed out from so many different angles that you experience it as undeniably real. Kind of like Descartes' I think, therefore I am. And I would argue that it's all the same stuff, that you have different levels. You've got sensory experience, and then you have the Zen observer, and I would say, well, it's all the brain and mind gossiping with itself about what's going on.
I just want to say one thing. I interrupted you about 15 minutes ago because you were getting to something.
Yeah.
Did you want to finish that before Rick?
I'm done.
Well, I wanted to see if there was, you're imbuing that dimension of the self with some kind of a spiritual significance, I think, Lance.
Me.
Yes. And I would too, to a certain extent, but I was interested in, you guys have very different takes on religious, spiritual, metaphysical questions, and I wanted to see if there was a way of bringing you two together on that point in a certain sense. And I guess to kind of finish my thought on why I think that's philosophically interesting for me more than just spiritually or experientially is I think that there's this issue with the emergence of consciousness in a material world. And how do you get, it's the hard problem in philosophy of mind, how do you get that feeling of what it's likeness? How do you get, an interiority? How do you get that out of material stuff? How does it just arise? And I can't, I don't think there's a good solution for that unless to say that subjectivity or interiority is just inherent to the cosmos in some way. and that as organisms and nervous systems get more complex, cognition and thoughts and problem solving and excellence at taking IQ tests improves, but that inherent feature, that transcendental witnessing consciousness that is the real, like, illuminating awareness, that's the real source of subjectivity, is inherent. It didn't spit in, like, flit into existence at one point when you got enough complexity. The complexity of minds increases with evolution, but subjectivity, that which perceives and is aware of and is the space within which thoughts and all that stuff arise, cognitions happen, is there. It might expand in some way.
I think I disagree.
Okay, good.
I think that, the feeling of really realness,
Yeah.
I think is a function of broadband, curated, not curated, but clean, like amplified information sharing among the different perceptual and analytical systems of the brain. That, when I had a job on a daily TV show, we'd sit in the edit bay and we'd work on a piece that in its final form would be 32 seconds long. And sometimes it would take hours. And we'd tweak the sound and we'd put in background music and we'd, add VO, and there would be color correcting, there'd be editing to make it the most powerful product we could make it. And I think all the systems in your brain edit your experience to make it the most.
But whose experience?
Your whole brain, the different parts of your brain. There's an as-if.
There's a central locus.
It's as if there's a central identity, but it's only as if. It's an identity that's created via the everything being turned into a Michael Bay production in your mind.
So, interestingly, I would agree with that, but I would have to maintain that that locus of awareness itself is distinct from all of those different modalities in the brain that are creating this illusion of a central self. The experience of a central self isn't coming from any of the narratives or the emotions or any of the cognitive stuff that's happening. And someone like Sam Harris is an interesting case because he is a meditator and a Buddhist in some ways, and he has used this phenomenological approach to argue against free will and against the notion of a coherent, unified self, I think.
I think that, I'm talking out of my ass now here, but I think that the notion of the unified self comes from you mostly agreeing with yourself. I think F. Scott Fitzgerald said the mark of an intelligent mind is being able to hold two contradictory thoughts simultaneously or something like that. But you can only do that with some stuff. Generally, in the rock tumbler of your head, the inconsistencies get driven out, and you, via, reaching consensus among your various perceptual and analytical systems, you have something that feels like a central identity. But it's still all these subsystems kind of working together.
Well, I'd like to interrupt here because I think that if you haven't taken a philosophy class, you don't know what Kevin's getting at. And what Kevin is getting at is the central question, among others, of philosophy is, how did consciousness arise? In other words, how did inorganic matter go from a plant to a thing that's aware of itself. And there are a lot of people like Sam Harris that are trying to locate that self. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, well, maybe there is no self. Maybe there are a series of chemical reactions in the brain that seem like thoughts, that seem like an identity, but they're not. They're nothing more than electromagnetic impulses.
If that
So
doesn't
am I sort of getting at what you're getting at? In other words, the question is, who is thinking these thoughts? And the Buddhists deal with it, but also Western science is trying to find out what is consciousness. And it can be approached from a philosophical point of view without any science. In other words, think hard about it, try to identify where your thoughts arise from. It can be approached through meditation, but it can also be approached by neurological studying, which is what Sam Harris is doing. He's trying to actually find something in the brain that is you.
He's doing both, and he's.
But am I on what you're on about?
Yeah, I'm on about this, definitely.
Okay, all right.
But I think he would say that if you meditate and you look closely at the mind and at thoughts, that you realize that you aren't the one doing the thinking of them.
Yeah.
They're just happening, and you don't have a say about it. You don't have a say really about anything that you're doing at all.
Which means that there is no free will,
Right.
which means that there is no spirit world, which means that there is no God. And if there is a God, he can't judge you because you haven't done anything wrong. You're more like a flower
No, that's
than you are like an independent.
too harsh. That's just
thinker
throwing out all the
and
babies
agent.
with all the bathwater.
Well, no, it isn't, because it's very simple. Either you have free will, which means that you had the choice to commit that crime or to become a priest, or you're more like a flower and you don't have any free will, you just think you do.
Yeah.
And then we live in a completely amoral universe.
Yeah,
Where
but
none of your actions are meaningful one way or the other.
all right. So I don't believe in free will.
Am I getting to what you're getting at? Is this of concern to you?
It's of concern, definitely. I
Okay.
would make some additions,
And we'll get to the arguing. We're going to take a break in a little once we get done with this, and then we'll start.
We don't
fucking
have to
getting-
argue. Maybe some.
Yeah, but some people are tuned in to see us and we've got a bunch of stuff to argue
about the
about.
White House Correspondents' Dinner.
Yeah, but let's finish.
you finish
All right,
up
all
with
right.
your
So
thing.
I think free will is the wrong question, and I don't think we have free will because all the things we do are based on the information in our minds and the hardware and software and wetware, whatever you want to call it, that evaluates that information. I think the important thing is informed will, where we make the best possible judgments, understanding the limitations and the evolved biases and other biases within our information processing systems.
But why are those meta decisions or judgments free from the conditioning of, preceding causes?
They're not, but the more you know, that star
Right.
that goes across, the more you know about that evolution is inbuilt like a self-destructive boner impeller, that you will make stupid decisions because of your dick. Knowing that,
You okay? He's got to straighten his
all right, we're gonna break.
He's got to straighten his leg.
Oh, cramp, I thought you said you had to crap. Oh,
Oh, no, I got a cramp in my hamstring.
Straighten your leg out.
all right, we're gonna break, we'll come back.
Oh,